As the Christmas story unfolds, once again remind you, the Christmas story it's not really about something that happened so long ago, 2,000 years ago. It's as timely as us, because it really is a story about us and the process of our evolution from human consciousness, that awareness that I'm a human being. I had a Unity minister back in 82 say to me, well, Greg, we have to face it, we're only human. And I thought, Weaver? Yeah. Weaver? Huh? Weaver said that. Yeah. We have to reach that place where we see that we're more than that. And it's a process. It's not that all of a sudden one day, oh, Christ lives and moves in me. Yesterday I was just a miserable worm and crawled in the dust. But today, whoa! It's not quite like, there is that moment, I think the butterfly experiences it. It went in a caterpillar and all of a sudden one day it erupts and steps out and says, sunshine, hummingbirds, wings, wow. There's got to be a moment where it says, one, where am I? What am I? And what in heaven's name happened? Don't you think? So we don't move just in a lightning flash from one point to another. There are stages. And this Bible story illustrates those stages. Now we all know the story of pretty much of Mary and Joseph and all of that. It's the whole Christmas story is about a journey, right? Well, but it begins before that. It begins in those last years of Herod the Great. There are a lot of things said about Herod the Great, but he may have seemed great, but seems like the critics of his period say, wasn't so great, wasn't so good, wasn't so honest, wasn't so ethical, wasn't so a lot of things. But he's a complex symbol, and a symbol for the human ego. I'll talk more about him as we go on over these days of Christmas, but it was in the kind of the final years of Herod's reign. We're not exactly sure when that was exactly. So it's hard to place Jesus' birth. It wasn't that, the calendar went the year 3 BC, 2 BC, 1 BC, 0, Jesus is born. Didn't quite happen like that. He may have been born in 4 BC. We're not sure. But I'm going to tell you how unimportant that is. Because it's not about then, it's about now. So we're in this time of the final years of Herod the Great. He was a puppet king of Rome. And some remarkable events happened during that time. They sort of began when an angel appeared to Zechariah. Have you heard of Zechariah? Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. They remind me of Abraham and Sarah. What was kind of unique about Abraham and Sarah? They were too old to have children, right? Zechariah and his Elizabeth, barren. Now that was a terrible thing for a Jewish woman to be, not to have children or son. They were old. Zechariah was a priest. By that it means he had certain understanding of the forms of religion, outer forms of religion. There are some of us who do that today. You go to church on Christmas, And you go to church on Easter. Those are required, right? And the rest doesn't matter. I remember when my mother did those two, and then I remember when she didn't do any. I used to say, Mom, you're a heathen. No, I didn't say that. But we can know the forms, right? You can rattle through all the prayers in a service. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Amen. You can do all of that stuff. That's the form, but it's the outer form. The real worship is what takes place inside. So Zechariah is at the temple. He's a priest. He's got 2 weeks' duty at the temple, and by the drawing of lots, like who got the short straw, he's designated as the person to go light the incense at the altar. So he's in there to do that. And a funny thing happened on the way to the altar. An angel appeared at the right side of the altar. Angel Gabriel. Same angel appeared to Mary. An angel appeared to Joseph, and that one's not named. But it works just as well if it's Gabriel for all three. Messenger of God. And he's got some amazing words to say to Zechariah. People outside, I'm sure, were concerned. What in the world is Zechariah doing? Why is he taking so long? They didn't know about the angel. But when that angel appeared, it said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah." Well, he already was. Wouldn't you be? What is this? What's happening? But it happens within us too. Somehow, an idea, a messenger of God, a divine idea enters your conscious mind. It bubbles up from the superconscious through the subconscious into your conscious mind. And sometimes those ideas scare us because they can mean change. They can mean doing something differently. They can mean letting go, giving up something lesser for something greater. So we become afraid. But the message is good. Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name. Wow, this sounds familiar. It almost rolls off your tongue. Jesus! No. John. Remember, Elizabeth is Mary's cousin. John the Baptist. You're experienced enough now, you can call him JTB. It's just like Abraham and Sarah. They were too old to have kids. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them and said, "You're going to have a baby." And Sarah laughed. Oh, she's something like 90. What? You would, I don't know whether you'd be happy or you'd say, "Oh God, no." 18 years, 21 years of, no thank you. The angel went on and said, "You shall have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice in his birth." The angel explained that John would be a prophet like Elijah, that he would, as Elijah, have a special mission, a special work to do. And that would be to turn the sons of Israel back to the Lord, help people prepare to receive the Lord. What did John the Baptist do? He was the precursor to Jesus, the forerunner of the Christ. He represents, Charles Fillmore said he represented illumined intellect, that first gets the concept of this divinity within. It's not the divinity, but it gets the idea of it and begins to say, this could be real for you. This might just be the truth about you. And begins to lead you down that road towards spiritual understanding. So Zechariah as a character sort of symbolizes a transition state between human consciousness, I'm only human, thanks Weaver, and spiritual consciousness, which says, I am the Christ, God's beloved child. He's in that transition between the two, growth in consciousness, moving out of one into the other. Now, you can imagine how much Zechariah had to say about their age and having a baby and all that. And the angel, I guess you can almost see the angel with his arms crossed and tapping his foot. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. Now the bad news, because you didn't believe. As you leave here, you're not going to be able to speak until the child is born. That sounds kind of odd, doesn't it? Put yourself in Zechariah's place. You get this revelation within the depths of your soul, this absolute divine idea, and it's a wonderful idea. And what happens when you go out and start telling all your friends? Okay, Debbie, when she was my secretary, there were times she would say, okay, Greg, and what do you say we go down to, let's go to Dairy Queen. She meant Shady Acres or someplace like that. They think you're nuts. They're going to tell you that, don't be silly. You're drinking too much. You're doing something too much. They're going to tear apart this revelation. Keep it to yourself. It is you that this revelation is for. So when you get that idea, wow, this Spirit of God really does live in me. The I of me is divine. The I of me is eternal. The I of me is peace. I have faith in that divine Christ of God within me. Keep it to yourself. Work with it yourself. You don't need to know what others think, because it doesn't matter what they think, except that it's too easy to get pulled right back into the only human role again. Outside of the temple, the people still waited. I have a luncheon appointment. Where in the world is Zechariah anyway? What's he doing in there? You suppose he's got a bottle hidden behind the altar or something? When he came out and he couldn't speak, the people realized, wait a minute, something special happened. Something unique. Something divine. And they believed that he had a vision. Hence the title of today. A vision. It's the first. The first of three. So, soon after Elizabeth learned about all of this, learned that she was pregnant. For about 5 months, she stayed in seclusion, keeping it to herself and giving thanks to God. It's a nice story, don't you think? But it's an important piece of teaching. And the teaching is about us as we unfold towards awareness of that divine Spirit of God within. I spoke about Herod. It's during the time of Herod, and it represents that time when we're in that only human consciousness. In that time where we think of ourselves as only human. And in that kind of state of consciousness, we're pretty much governed by the ego. Now, while he is an historical figure, he's an archetypal figure, and any king is a symbol for the ego. The ego. Interesting word. Actually, ego means I am. But this ego is the little me, as I think of myself. It is our personalized sense of our own identity. How do we get that? Well, we get it by life experiences and by seeing how the world seems to work through our human eyes and how people react to us and respond to us. Personality, persona. In the Greek theater, they wore masks. Persona. The masks were the various personalities that they put on as the characters. And we do the same thing. In certain situations, you learn how to behave in that situation to get your needs met. And one of the most basic needs met and the purpose that we're here, right? To stay alive, to survive. So, in that understanding of ourselves as only human, we're busy in survival mode. Got to get enough, got to have enough, got to find somebody to love me, take care of me. We worry about clothing and food and automobiles and houses, and that maybe something's going to kill you, like some disease. Or we think of ourselves in a variety of personas or masks. That becomes the ego. Now that ego, as I said, is a product of experience with this outer environment. So from adolescence until, from birth to adolescence, we're building that personality, that ego. And for some of us, we continue a whole life with that same personality, putting on various masks, handling the world with manipulation because it's the only thing we understand, trying to adjust things out here, never thinking about something up here. That's King Herod, the human ego. Now Gabriel's an interesting figure. As I said, an angel appears 3 times in the Christmas story as part of a vision. And the ones we're going to talk about today is to Zechariah. Next week is to Mary. But the third one is to Joseph. Now we know it's Gabriel. He identifies himself to Zechariah. He identifies himself to Mary. But he is not identified. The angel is not identified to Joseph. But symbolically, it works if it's Gabriel as well. His name means a mighty man of God, or God is my strength. And in this Christmas story, he symbolizes the wisdom of allowing the Christ nature to come forth, to emerge, and to begin to take charge of the consciousness, to integrate you, to make you one, spirit, soul, body, fully connected, thinking and feeling natures, and connected to that super consciousness or divine mind as it expresses in you and through you. Zechariah, as I said, was a priest. And his name means whom Jehovah has remembered. Sounds like Jehovah or God remembered Zechariah. He sent him a messenger, right? And it also means the Lord is remembered. Do we ever forget? Do you ever forget God? Well, I may be unique, because I do. Once in a while, I realize, oh, wait a minute. I'm trying to do this myself. Rather than remembering God works, it lives and moves and has its being in me and works through me. Okay, Lord, let's do this together. To bring to mind, to remember that presence and that power. Zechariah is beginning to remember that it's there with him. At first, Zechariah is that traditional thinking nature. He's concerned with the outer forms of religion. He's a priest. He's got to do these activities and things and be at certain places. But then in this process, he's in transition towards spiritual understanding. So the awakening towards spiritual awareness, towards knowing that God is within him and works through him, and that he and God are one and inseparable. He is becoming conscious of those spiritual things which underlie all forms of religion. Charles Fillmore spoke about various religions and said, in back of all the forms is an underlying truth. And the forms point to truths. They are not the truths. They are the forms. Rituals are merely symbols to point us towards some inner wisdom or knowledge, but they're not it. When you come to candlelighting, you see lots of symbols. But it's a night that is to bypass this intellect of ours and get right to the soul level, where you take it in your awareness as symbols of your life and your experience as a spiritual being. Now, Blessed Elizabeth, her name means God's oath. She's a symbol of the soul, and the soul is the old-fashioned word. The new word is consciousness. Consciousness of love and confidence in God's promises. There are many promises in the Bible where God says He is the provider, He is the source of all life and healing, and that He makes all things new, and a variety of things. So this character, Elizabeth, represents that awareness of God's promises and a faith in those promises. And it's joined with an intellectual understanding during this process of transition from human consciousness to spiritual consciousness. Remember, we always are and have a thinking nature, such as Zechariah, and a feeling nature, such as Elizabeth. So these are These are part of two halves of the same thing, your consciousness. And she's old at this particular time. Well, I shouldn't say old. Bible says advanced in years. Doesn't that sound better? And she's barren. So she represents sort of a type of mother, a form of potentiality, not yet given substance to bring forth or express, but carrying all this potential. A phase of soul unfoldment which precedes this emergence of that Christ consciousness within us. Now, Zechariah, the important part of the story happens at the temple. It doesn't matter whether the temple is one built by Solomon or the one built by Herod. Both temples stand for the same thing. In the time the temple was built, they represent the cosmos as the Jewish people understood it, as they pictured it. Jesus used the temple as a symbol, called it a symbol of his physical body, symbol for his human body, so that the temple itself may symbolize the body. But the body glorified, or as Charles Fillmore used the word, regenerated, elevated, lifted up into spiritual awareness as opposed to only human, physical flesh. And the body regenerated by spiritual understanding, a spiritual consciousness in which the Spirit of God resides. Isn't that where God is supposed to live? In the temple? Yeah. And he's at a particular location in the temple, at the altar. It's the focal point in the temple. It's the place where devotion to God is expressed in conscious communion with God. So Zechariah represents a consciousness, our consciousness in this time of transition from human to spiritual awareness, Christ awareness. When we're quiet and we're being introspective and we begin to connect to that intelligence, that life, and that light within. Hence, you begin to have communication, an angel, a messenger, an idea that comes. And then, just like people throughout history, we jump up and say, Eureka! I have found it. You reach that place of awareness, of a new truth about yourself. So, that altar is that center of spiritual consciousness, where we express love of God, where we consciously commune with God, and give up the lower for the higher. The lower self, the human self, for the higher self, the God self, the divine self, for the higher. Sometimes we can think of it as a loss, but it's a step up. It's a leap up, a leap into an ever larger experience of life, life without limits, and life in its fullness. So, this week, as we move through this Advent season, I'd like you to think about the candle today, which we lit for peace. Last week's faith, this one peace. And realize that that peace you find at the altar within yourself. That center in your consciousness where you can commune and sense that divine presence and allow the peace of God to flow over you and through you. And it is then that you get the word, the message, that the angel, the messenger of God, can come to you and say, there is so much more to you than you have known before. But this Christmas, truly the Christ of God is born in your consciousness this year. And you express God's glory. You need to think about that. You need to spend some time contemplating that this week, so you can move to the next phase. And that's the second vision.